All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Marketplace Risk Virtual Event Series. My name is Andrea, and I'm the Director of Events and Logistics here at Marketplace Risk. Today, we welcome Marc Coderre, atTrulioo, and Juliet Becusson of Anygood. Our virtual events are designed to help marketplace and sharing economy startups successfully navigate complex risk management, trust and safety, compliance, and legal subject matter, so they can avoid distractions in order to focus on launching and growing. Be sure to check out marketplacerisk.com to access hundreds of hours of content, including our master's program, platform podcast, and previous live events, and to subscribe to our newsletter where we keep you up to date on everything, including the upcoming Sharing Economy Global Summit in London. Thank you for tuning into today's session. First, a couple housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, so the recording will be available for you to access on the Marketplace Risk website. Second, all attendees have listening capabilities only and are otherwise muted. And third, do submit your questions via the control panel. If we have enough time at the end, we will answer as many as we can. If we don't get to your questions, feel free to email us at info@marketplacerisk.com and we'll get your questions answered. And now, without further ado, presenters, over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. As Andrea mentioned, my name is Juliet Eggleston. I'm the founder of Anygood, a recruitment technology platform. I'm also chair of the Sharing Economy Council within the Confederation of British Industry, so represent an awful lot of platforms and marketplaces that I'm hopefully representing today and able to ask questions about. There will be questions at the end, hopefully, if we have time, and I'll be asking questions throughout as well. Marc, perhaps you can share a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Director of Customer Success at atTrulioo. atTrulioo is an identity, business, and document verification provider. We work with some of the largest marketplaces in the world, but we also work with scale-ups and startups as well. And I'm really excited to share with you some of the best practices we've been involved with in helping those organizations future-proof. So excited for the conversation today.
Definitely, and we've got a great agenda ahead. I know a lot of the questions that we're going to be covering are key to so many marketplaces. We're going to be going through what are the most common fraud threats and business challenges facing marketplaces, tactics and strategies for how marketplaces can tackle these threats and challenges, how to build trust and safety programs, and navigating and anticipating threats and developing strategies to future-proof trust and safety initiatives. So initially, Marc, perhaps you could share what you think some of the most common challenges that are faced by marketplaces.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can probably guess there are a lot of common challenges here. We've listed 7, which are still significant. But I wanted to step back and talk about a topic that is going to be permeating throughout the webinar today. And this is really around trust. Trust is crucial for any marketplace to be successful. Trust is needed if a merchant and a buyer are to make that financial transaction. Trust is needed for an individual to interact with another individual on a particular type of content, etc. They need to make sure that individual exists. And trust is needed if an individual is to perhaps engage or read news on a marketplace, and they need to trust that that news item is real and legitimate. And so with each one of these items here is really impacting trust that customers experience in marketplaces. atTrulioo actually a while back did a survey of around 3,000 consumers, and 60% of those consumers mentioned that there is a lack of trust of marketplaces compared to other organizations or websites that they interact with on a day-to-day basis. So this is a true challenge and problem for marketplaces. From a fraud standpoint, this is something that we see quite common with marketplaces and has really escalated since COVID began. We've seen increases in phony sellers, counterfeit goods, impersonation scams, or scams that involve collecting money before the goods are delivered. We've also seen challenges around adverse content, so content that is harmful both to users as well as to minors, and it's really important that marketplaces prevent this adverse content from appearing on their ecosystem. There is sanctions, and sanctions are especially relevant since the crisis and war in Ukraine starting late February and into March. We were seeing sanctions change not on a monthly basis, not on a weekly basis, even a daily basis, but on an hourly basis. And it's exceptionally important that marketplaces are responding to this and making sure that they have the tools needed to respond to that as well. There's also a increase in compliance and regulations that are impacting marketplaces today, and it's really important to stay abreast of those changes, and especially that you're satisfying those anti-money laundering laws to make sure that your marketplace is not a vector of any nefarious activity that's happening. Fake accounts as well. So fake accounts are not only a drag and waste on the system, but they also really reduce that lack of, or help increase that lack of trust. Users won't engage on a marketplace with individuals or buyers or merchants if they're not real. And it's really important that they know that those are real individuals on the other side of the screen. And so each one of those elements of challenges that marketplaces see today are really, again, like I said, leading to that reduction in user trust, meaning that the marketplace is failing, or reputational harm. And each one of these issues, sanctions, adverse content, fake accounts, fraud, compliance, can really lead to potential backlash that they may see both publicly or internally, but still backlash nonetheless, and something marketplaces need to be making sure that they are observing and have a strategy to improve.
And I guess, you know, from speaking to an awful lot of marketplaces, a lot of these challenges are invisible until they actually show up and cause you an issue, and so hence sort of the management of the risk around that, but also the things that you need to put in place need to be invisible to users as well, to allow that to, you know, it can be a challenge to put measures in that increase that friction. So it's the invisibility of the solutions as well as the invisibility of the challenges that can create more problems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, challenges not only invisible, but future planning as well, right? And I think that's the purpose of today, is how do you look at those invisible challenges and make sure that you're setting your marketplace up for success in the future.
Yeah. So as we think more about that risk-based approach, would you be able to go through sort of what that looks like and why it's key to marketplaces?
Yeah, absolutely. This is our first recommendation to customers as they start to explore how to future-proof their program and how to use technology effectively to, of course, maximize the number of users that they can onboard, but reduce fraud. And that's really the crux of a risk-based approach. Some of you here may have heard of what a risk-based approach is. It's a mainstay in the regulatory world. And I actually like to start defining it by what it's not, and what you shouldn't be doing, and that's a one-size-fits-all approach. And so, you know, if you can imagine a one-size-fits-all approach for your onboarding program, you would either need to have a very lax approach, perhaps where you're not meeting every regulatory requirement that exists across your marketplace, or perhaps you're opening yourself and exposing yourself to fraud. So that's one approach if you were to go a one-size-fits-all. The other is actually the complete opposite. So you would look at the most strict region, jurisdiction, regulatory requirements that you need to hit, and apply that across your whole user base. And the downside of that is you're going to lead to significant churn, customer churn, or drop off as well. And that's really not what you want to do as you're creating a scaled marketplace. And so what we always recommend is this risk-based approach, where you're taking a focused approach based on your own risk tolerance, but also based on the regulatory requirements that you have to adhere to, and perhaps also looking at building out specific profiles of customer types so that you can apply a unique onboarding program to that customer type. So a great example is a large e-commerce website that we work with. They've actually looked at multiple different customer profiles and assigned a risk level. So they've got a low risk level, they've got a high risk level from a merchant standpoint as they have merchants onboarding to their marketplace. And for the low risk merchant, they are going through a relatively simple onboarding form. Perhaps they're inputting their business name, their business address, their business registration number, maybe a tax number. And if they're verified through a platform like atTrulioo, they can then go on. They are a business, they exist as a business, and because they fit that low risk profile, they can then go onto the marketplace and start selling goods. Now, for the customers that are a high risk profile, they're going to apply, and they do apply, what we call purposeful friction. So friction that's added on to their workflow to ensure that all the due diligence has been done in order to onboard this high risk merchant. So an example could be perhaps not only are they doing confirming that this business exists like they did with the low risk merchants, but they're also adding document verification. Perhaps they're collecting a passport or ID from the ultimate beneficial owner. Perhaps they're actually jumping on a video screening conversation with that business owner to make sure that not only they are who they say they are, but their business exists as well, and they have ownership in that business, as well as adding in additional documentation that may be required to conduct that due diligence. So that's just a good example of a really, really customized approach that you need to take through your overall onboarding experience so that you can maximize those users that you're onboarding in a compliant fashion, meeting those regulatory requirements, and ensuring that you're not exposing yourself to fraud.
And I think the whole conversation around friction is fascinating when we look at verification and the speed of verification. I think a lot of platforms maybe consider that friction is a bad thing, when actually taking this risk-based approach can bring significant benefits. And certainly in my experience of working with quite complex processes, sometimes I've been, for my sins, been involved in the pensions process in the UK, and that can be quite a significant long process, but actually we were finding that people preferred that because it gave them some trust that it was being taken seriously by the platform, and I see that starting to come out now in terms of having those friction points that actually increase trust. So it'd be really interesting to hear more about those benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you give a great example of that purposeful friction actually adding value into the overall trusted experience. Customers may expect it or want that experience because if they have to go through it, then they know everyone else in that marketplace has to go through it, and because of that, they can truly ensure that someone on the other end is an actual merchant or an individual, and they're not going to experience fraud. But yeah, this risk-based approach, it's really there because it can help build that crucial trust and deliver a great onboarding experience. It can provide and ensuring that you're meeting those regulatory requirements. It's going to make sure that you're also taking a privacy-centric approach, only collecting the data points that are absolutely necessary, and end of the day, allowing for that customization approach, whether that is on a profile basis, regional basis, so that you can maximize, again, the number of users in a quick fashion, as well as reducing fraud.
No, absolutely, and sort of being upfront with the user to ensure that they see the process is really, really useful, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a key mainstay to actually building trust. So again, going back to how crucial that trust element is to any marketplace. It's exceptionally important, and there's a four key things that we are always looking at when we're trying to build trust. It's number one, we really want to be transparent on the type of data that we're collecting. So data specifically is actually really involved in, and this data collection is really connected to future proofing, because as you build out that secure and automated onboarding program, you're going to need to tap into tools and technology that will allow you to automate that, right? And one part of that that atTrulioo provides is a verification against government or credit databases. And some of those databases in particular countries require different data points than others do. And so you really can't have that one size, that one approach to all countries. You really need to regionalize it. And a good example is in Poland. In order to cross-reference someone against the government database, you actually need to collect a national ID or PESEL number. And so otherwise the automation and performance you'll get with automation will be quite low. And so really being transparent with customers as to why you need to collect that national ID number, why you need to ask for a PESEL number, and how that benefits them is really important to building that trust. And again, that connects to that secure and automated onboarding process, and a point that you brought on, Juliet, earlier, adding that purposeful friction, especially if it's related to, a marketplace being in financial services or pensions, like you had mentioned, that expectation is there for customers and users and merchants to be going through, a relatively extensive onboarding process, and again, why that risk-based approach will be important to knowing where your users fit in that expectation. One thing that we always see with our larger customers and scale-ups as well is just outlining what that trust and safety program is, being very clear to them as to why are we asking for these specific data points? What is a KYC or trust and safety process? How often is it being reviewed and updated, and what kind of success has it had as well? I think users want to see and they just want to see this transparency from marketplaces and organizations, especially if they're giving additional data points and PII to your organization. A great example is actually a crypto exchange that we work with, and they actually recently wrote a blog article that outlined what it wasn't trust and safety, but it was their KYC process. They went in detail as to how crypto exchanges conduct KYC, why KYC or know your customer is needed, what points during the customer journey will they ask for certain data points and collection, and what are the outcomes of that as well. And that just, I found, was such a great transparent way to detail not only what this specific crypto exchange did, but also what the industry expectations are as well, as this becomes a standardized approach. And so really important to outline that for you and your customers.
Mm-hmm.
The last item is just as you build out and map out the trust and safety programs, is to really work cross-functionally, make sure you've got the right work streams across not only compliance, but customer success, sales, product, legal. All these different departments are involved in building this out and helping to make sure that the right trust and safety program is built in order to meet the organization's objectives, and whether that is, that mix of reducing fraud and increasing and maximizing users onboarding.
And you mentioned in that talking about scale-ups as well as the large organizations, and I think a lot of us perhaps think of these types of programs as being something for the larger organizations, when actually it's something that these programs need to be considered much earlier on, probably in the journey of a marketplace. I wonder if you could sort of share a bit about that, from purely sort of from a scale-up perspective, and how that that could work.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're working with a global marketplace, probably a bit past a scale up, but they had challenges that are very similar. These are industry-wide challenges, and so they were seeing a increase in fraud that was coming from their merchants, and that was leading to a significant decrease in trust on the products purchased. Individuals were getting fake or fraudulent goods, and a lot of this was coming from a particular region, and in China. And so it really was connected to that risk-based approach, that you need to identify what your risk tolerance is, B, know what your regulatory requirements are, but also C, identify what is the goal. And the goal was to meet all those areas, but also reduce this key fraud element. And so we were part in working with them in providing a few different recommendations and paths for those low risk, medium risk, high risk sellers that would go through different levels of verification and purposeful friction. And so those low sellers groups, which were the majority of the groups, would go through a simple onboarding form and a few other steps from a friction standpoint, and we would work with them to refine that, make sure that they can maximize the auto acceptance rate, which in this instance was we were able to get them up to 96% from the high 80s. And that was a really great example of partnering with an organization like atTrulioo, identifying the goal of reducing fraud, but also maximizing user onboardings and working with us on a customized approach for a particular market in China. Now we were able to take that approach because those challenges were still being seen in other regions, and built out very similar work streams for regions in the EU and in North America and Asia Pacific as well. So not only do you have the challenge today, which was China, but also being able to leverage that and scale this program out to other global regions as well. So being able to pivot as the initial challenge decreases because the technology works, and then moving to what the next key focus and priority items are.
And I guess from just from the nature of the business and the variety of different marketplaces that you work with, and different jurisdictions and geographies, that should marketplaces be listening to the webinar, then you would be able to sort of have a variety of different case studies for different scenarios, given that the many different, I know that different geographies have so many different considerations, and that's something that you would be able to share with marketplaces as they get in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be happy to share case studies, examples, and my team is actually very exposed to all these different types of marketplaces and strategies and countries, and so we come not only with us but also our data science team with a wealth of knowledge to help organizations and marketplaces really respond to not only the challenges they're seeing today in specific jurisdictions, but also perhaps future-proofing. What are other marketplaces doing to adhere to certain regulatory changes, or what are they doing to maybe take a much more advanced risk-based approach and a compliance-oriented focus as well.
I certainly think that when you're based in one country, often you just don't have the visibility of the risks elsewhere and the controls that need to be in place. And so having that knowledge to be able to tap into, probably at quite an early stage as well, just to ensure that you are sort of future-proofing, then that can be incredibly useful. And so moving on to sort of that threats and emerging challenges and future-proofing strategies, would you be able to share more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, you mentioned it already, Juliet, it can be very difficult if you're based in Canada like I am, or the UK like you are, to know what's going on globally. But I think it's really important to keep abreast of those new and upcoming jurisdictional requirements that are constantly evolving. A good example here in Canada is that AML regulations are now going to be extended to crowdfunding platforms. So that's a type of business that never had to meet these requirements that will now need to meet these requirements in a particular region. This is happening on a region by region level. Also, why it's really crucial to have a focused strategy on each region so you can meet those individual requirements. And easier said than done. I think it's important to have a team. It's important to work within industry groups to make sure that you're partnering with them and being part of a larger marketplace voice to understand what those requirements and changes are, so then you can brainstorm with your peers as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think it's also really important to look at the tech stack that you have today and make sure that you've got a partner that will be able to work with you on each one of your different streams, but also able to pivot quickly to help you with your other future needs and streams. Leveraging new technologies that kind of look at different aspects of verification. So one, being a bit more active aspect. So this could be like submitting, a document, perhaps biometric data or other types of, one-time password engagement, authentication, or perhaps passive technologies, maybe relying on other inputs that help add additional verification and knowledge to your overall onboarding flow for features maybe like IP address intelligence or geolocation or more mobile carrier intelligence. Things like that can help really add a lot of value to your overall onboarding mix.
In terms of just a couple of questions around that, in terms of that sort of understanding the different technology providers, I would assume that that within this space there are people that do provide many different solutions, but given the breadth, that global nature and that understanding of the global challenges is incredibly important, and one that perhaps when you're in one country you might not think about asking about, but as marketplaces, the one unique thing that we tend to have is that we do tend to go global compared to an awful lot of other businesses because of the nature of platforms and marketplaces. And so that's important in terms of that anticipation of where you might be in the future isn't necessarily where you just are today as a marketplace.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's really important to based on your business, of course, based on what your risk-based approach is going to be, your risk profile, your regional focus, is to find a partner that can mirror that in the short term, and then make sure that you're finding a partner that will mirror what your long-term goals and objectives are as well.
Excellent, thank you. Just to go over the key takeaways from what we've gone through, I've got a few questions in my mind already, but as we're going through those, but maybe you could take us through the key takeaways from today, and we can follow up with some questions as we go.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Well, number one, this was throughout the presentation, so I'll say it again, make sure you understand what your risk tolerance is going to be, make sure that you've worked with, each of those departments to understand and to build, that strategy, and because that will directly impact on what your approach is going to be on a regional basis, jurisdictional basis, and mapping out, what are those profiles that you'll be assigning to, so that you can build out the ideal workflow for each one of those characteristics. The other is just making sure that you're looking into the collection of data, how that will impact what you're wanting to do from an automation and onboarding perspective, and making sure that you're able to pivot globally, regionally, or pivot to new technologies, given your focus as an organization. Then, end of the day, connected to that is just preparing for the future. So really being abreast of those changes, working with industry groups to make sure that the upcoming changes, and making sure that you've got the right tech stack to meet those and still have a great onboarding experience for your merchants and customers.
That's incredibly interesting, Mark. Thank you. I do have a few questions before we go to others. In terms of that collection of data, I know that obviously we do have an awful lot of marketplaces where they're just building their tech stack now, and we talk about sort of that moving forward. So understanding that data across different jurisdictions, even if it's not necessarily used for all of the things you're going to use it for, I would imagine can be quite important when you're considering your data architecture and the types of technologies and how to store that data, at least so you're storing it with the idea of using it in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. That needs to be a cornerstone, not only on what you're collecting and why you're collecting it, but also how you're storing it. And that needs to also be very upfront to your customers, be very transparent on how that is, on what you're doing in the back end as well. I think that's exceptionally important. aTrulioo ourselves, we actually do not store data and PII, and that allows us to be quite nimble in the types of countries and data partners that we work with, and making sure that our customers are able to have a path to actually storing that information.
Mm-hmm. No, that's it's incredibly useful to hear how it's important throughout the journey of a business. I think right from the word go to be considering it. And we've touched on this a little bit, but when marketplaces are choosing providers, and it is something that is critical, and people are often finding challenges with deciding how to choose a provider. What would you say are the most important things to consider when they're choosing a provider for these types of services?
Yeah, I think they need to first go through that risk-based approach exercise, making sure that they have built out their ideal onboarding workflows per the low-risk merchants, high-risk merchants, specific regions. And then once they have built those out and understand which custom workflows they are wanting, to find a provider that can meet each one of those different requirements, that will be really crucial from a technology standpoint. So making sure that they want to add, that purposeful friction, that document verification, that video verification, biometrics, that they have access to that tech stack. And then if they are wanting to have a very regional approach or country level approach, to make sure that they can connect to those appropriate databases to actually have a quite effective automatic program and process in place with high performance as well. So that's always a key point. You want to make sure that if you're going to automate something, you can have this high pass rate all connected to your overall risk profile and compliance requirements.
Right. And in terms of, one of the big words that we often use in technology and marketplaces and startups is the agile word. And so how can marketplaces remain agile with that onboarding of new users?
Yeah, it's really making sure that that partner that you have is also agile. And so if you need to quickly pivot to collect or maybe stop collecting a certain data point, like a national ID, like I spoke about before with Poland, that PESEL number, that is you've got a partner that has access to that information. You can plug that in relatively quickly. It's already integrated through perhaps the API that you have access to, and you're able to make a quick configuration change and change to your onboarding form, and you can pivot quick. I think just having all of those different access levels to those different technologies will allow you to do that.
Yeah, no, excellent. That's the end of the questions that I have. Andrea, perhaps if you could share whether there are questions in the chat.
Yes, so we did have one question come in. What kind of biometric data is useful to collect?
Yeah, great question. Biometric data, I think it really depends on, of course, the region that you're wanting to be, because I think there's different regulations involved. But there's photo information, there's a liveness information that you can collect, and how you store that, I think, really depends on what you deem necessary as your organization. So I would kind of start there, but I think there's lots of cool technologies that are coming out around other biometric information, fingerprint IDs, iris, all those are really upcoming and come to the forefront regarding technology providers like atTrulioo, but also other onboarding flows that you probably have seen.
Those are the only questions that I've had in the chat at this point.
Excellent. Thank you. If we've not had any other questions, then I think we can close out there. Marc, are there any final remarks you'd like to make just in closing?
Yeah, I think the key thing is that this can seem like a massive undertaking, and I just want to make sure everyone knows that you can really focus your resources, pick a country or challenge that you have, and build your strategy on that. And once you're happy with your approach for that country, build out and pivot to your other global wishes and aspirations. I think that's really important to know for anyone kind of looking to build, not only a trust and safety program, but looking to future-proof it as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Andrea, back to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you Marc and Juliet for today's presentation. As a reminder, check out marketplacerisk.com to access this recording, along with hundreds of hours of content, and to subscribe to our email newsletter to stay up to date on all events. Thank you everyone, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks everyone. Bye.